devotees asked me if I had any difficulty in understanding his accent and the way his pronunciation was going. And I said no. In fact, I made a comment that I could detect a slight Scottish accent in some of the words that he was using. And I didn't know that he was, when he was a young boy, he went to Scottish Churches College in Calcutta. Although later on, when I was able to get his association while massaging him, and Srila Prabhupada was getting to know me, he was asking questions where I was coming from. That's the first thing he asked me, was where I was coming from, and I said, Scotland. And then he started to reminisce that when he was being educated, he was educated by, all his teachers were Scottish, and that he learnt, he had to study the Bible, he learnt the Catechism, and he asked me if I knew any Scottish lords. And I said, no, I don't personally know any Scottish lords. And he said, oh, I met one Lord Zetland. He came to our college in Calcutta. And then he asked me if I studied British history. And I said, oh yes, I was, my whole education was in Scotland. So then he asked me a few questions. He asked me, when was the Battle of Trafalgar? And I said 1805. And then he asked me, when was the Battle of Waterloo? And I said 1815. And he said, oh, you know British history just like I know British history. So he was kind of testing me. And also he was asking things like, how far was Glasgow from London? And I told him approximately 400 miles. How long did it take to go there by train? I said approximately 8 hours. So when he was relating like that with me, it put me very much at my ease, because I really didn't know how to start up any conversation with Srila Prabhupada when I was in the process of massaging him, and that's the way he won my heart over too, because he was relating to me in a way that I could appreciate, and I could talk with him. It wasn't a philosophical discussion, the first meeting. Although, when I got the opportunity to ask him a question, which was after leaving the airport and arriving at John Lennon's estate, Prabhupada gave a kirtan and a very philosophical class. But my uppermost desire at that time was to ask when I could get initiation, because that's all I was thinking about. So at the end of class, and Prabhupada asked for questions, I stuck up my hand and he said yes, and I said, when can I take initiation? Nothing to do with the class. I mean, it was nothing to do with the class, but Srila Prabhupada said, that is another thing, that we will see. But it was about a week later that Prabhupada actually got round to performing initiation.
Well, I remember when I was asked to put the garland on Prabhupada, and I always remember that when Prabhupada came through the doors of the lounge, it was that his smile was like, as I say, oceanic. It was just an oceanic smile. And I could just, straight away, I actually froze, but I remember actually thinking that this person's not in this dimension. Even as I was only young then, I was only just turned 18, but I could tell this person's not in this world, he's not on this planet. And I froze, I couldn't put the garland on Prabhupada. So I was just standing there looking at him, and Prabhupada, of course, was just beaming, and I wasn't the only garland, but devotees were coming up to him, but I just froze. I didn't pay my obeisance to anything, I just froze. And Prabhupada walked straight past me, and I was standing there with this big garland. And I'm just looking at this person. Then I ran up to Prabhupada and slipped the garland on him. But it was kind of funny because I was obviously the reception committee with the garland, but I actually just froze. I didn't know what to do, And I remember that, particularly Prabhupada's smile just knocked me out. And I remember one thing was that all the devotees were crying practically. That's the fascinating thing about it. I looked around, and there was a lot of devotees there, and a lot of people were crying. And I think that's just made me even more kind of amazed at the potency of this person. You know, that someone could walk through a door and cause everyone to cry. You know, it was just fascinating.
I was very struck by the seriousness of Srila Prabhupada. There on the poster there was a poster of Prabhupada in the temple in Manchester, a black and white picture of Prabhupada sitting on his bed in Bury Place, taken by Guru Das. I used to think, why does he look so serious? Why isn't he laughing like the other gurus do? And then it suddenly hit me that life itself is so serious. And Prabhupada's gravity and the depth of his compassion came across from his picture.
When he was once, this was a time before he was at the manor, he was leaving to go to the airport and I was sitting in a van waiting to follow him. So I was sitting on the right, in the driver's seat, like this, pronounced, and he came past very, very slowly in the car on my right, lower, and he was on my side of his car. So he went past and he looked up at me, like that, and returned my gesture, like this, which I was astounded by. And then our eyes met. And the car was moving very, very slowly still, but our eyes were actually in contact for about, probably about 2 seconds. And that's probably the most memorable experience of my life, that glance that I got. Because it seemed as if time stopped. And what I felt was that Prabhupada saw thousands of births. He just looked right. It was a timeless experience, and it was like in another dimension. And it felt as if he'd seen thousands of births of nonsense. And not only seeing, but I felt complete acceptance of me with all that nonsense. And then he was gone. But that created an incredible link between me and Prabhupada, which I've never forgotten. I cannot forget it.
Whenever there were large morning walks, I got to go anyway in the van, but this one particular morning stands out in my mind very strongly because I think it's probably the first time I ever spoke to His Divine Grace. I was very nervous of Srila Prabhupada as a young devotee, and I thought only Americans could speak to him. You know, at that time, it was all the American devotees were interacting. And we were all younger devotees, the Welsh and English devotees, and felt somewhat more intimidated. So I was afraid to speak to Prabhupada. And I also thought, well, what's there to say? He's speaking, I'm just listening, basically. But on this one particular morning, I felt he said something, and I felt inclined to ask my first question from Srila Prabhupada. And it was in relation to him walking through St. James's Park. There's some nice photographs in black and white that I see sometimes. Ribatananda and Swami, myself, Prabhupada, and I think the driver, one of the devotees, there were just 3 or 4 of us walking. And there were some young hippies sleeping on the park benches in their sleeping bags, and as Prabhupada walked past them, he commented, by good fortune, these can all come to Krishna consciousness. And he carried on walking, and just this word good fortune kept going around in my mind. Does this mean that there's some kind of luck involved here, that somebody gets Krishna consciousness, somebody else doesn't, by some throw of the dice? And in my neophyte stage, I was trying to understand what did Prabhupada mean by good fortune, specifically. So after a few hundred yards, I plucked up the courage and tried to phrase my question in such a way that wasn't offensive, and very nervously asked, Srila Prabhupada, when you say by good fortune, can you explain that, please? Because I understand from reading your literature and hearing you speak that nothing happens by chance. That was my angle. So by good fortune, what do you mean? So he continued to walk for a little bit, and all of a sudden he stopped dead in his tracks and frightened me, actually, because he turned straight into my face with about a few inches apart, maybe 12 inches on me. And with his walking stick hand, He picked up his walking stick and he pointed right in my face. And he said, "We are their good fortune." So I understood from that I had to preach in the future. So, and I've meditated on that for years and years and years, but actually, you know, Prabhupada has been, in his humility, never said, "I am their good fortune," but "we are their good fortune." So I began to pick up the understanding more deeply about the importance of spreading Krishna consciousness.